The running back position, the landscape of it is tough enough to manage when players are healthy. Now throw in some injuries, it's going to make plenty of headaches for fantasy managers. What do we do with these players who are coming off injuries? Some of them even catastrophic. We're diving in because bienvenidos and welcome to the Injury Prone Podcast. I'm Jorge Martin, and to my side is the man who puts suave in suavemente, el hombre at Pro Athlete PT, mi compadre, Dr. Edwin Porras. ¿Cómo estamos?
I wasn't expecting that intro, so I like it. No, I definitely don't put the suave into anything, man. I put the suave into throwing my back out every now and then. I have to follow my own PT advice, but no, man, it sounds like you need some work on your back after going to Topgolf last weekend. So, man, we're aging ever so slowly. I text you, your daughter's doing some work for me on the side for the clinic from the social media perspective, and I text you because it was her birthday. She told me it was her birthday coming up. And I thought it was her 21st. Turns out it's her 20th. And I'm just thinking to myself, holy cow, I am old. Dude, I feel the oldest when people aren't even 21 yet. And they're in my ethos. So, yeah, man, it's going to be that time, though. I mean, we're sitting here May, right? We still got a couple, really, I would consider them down months in the fantasy season, in the fantasy space, unless you want to aggregate and say, Joe Burrow needs to have his hand cut off. His hand needs to be cut off, and Cooper Kupp's going to retire. Like, we'll see what comes by August. But yeah, man, I'm ready to talk about some of these running back injuries.
And of course, Jonathan Brooks, who we covered in a previous episode, is going to be ready, on July 1st.
Right, exactly. No, yeah, they're all ahead of schedule, or they're all getting their hand cut off. So, yeah.
It's everything. It's tan locos in the world. But yeah, you know what? There was one thing I wanted to touch on with you because, we're as you mentioned, we're past the we're into OTAs now and everything like that. And we're getting some news here and there, which is a lot of fun to kind of look ahead to the season, but we're obviously months away from a lot of crazy stuff happening. But one of the things that kind of struck me a little bit was Marvin Harrison Jr. getting, kind of basically stepping out on all of the combine, pro days and everything like that. He said he wanted to just concentrate on kind of training for football, which I wish all of them could, because I know we're going to be talking about hamstrings and everything like that when for rookies coming there. But can you tell us the difference between like what a player is doing getting ready for the combine as opposed to what they're doing getting ready for just NFL football?
Yeah, it's totally different, right? I mean, they're really preparing before the combine they really are slimming down, number one. So they're eating less, right? Or they're bulking up in the opposite direction, depending on who they want to satisfy, right? Who their audience is, who they want to satisfy. Some of them, they know coming in, hey, the book on you is that you're slow around corners. So what do? They practice the cone drills, right? Hey, some people are super concerned that you don't have the straight line speed. So what do? They slim down. They don't eat, right? When they weigh in, they don't eat anything like the day before. And then they try to run as fast as they possibly can. And then they try to change the narrative, right? Or some people just ignore it, right? It just depends, right? The lower level guys, the ones that are projected, really beyond the 4th, 5th, 6th round, those are the guys that are really trying to turn heads. So when, from a training perspective, the best thing the number one thing to know is that it's so different. Every guy's training for the underwear Olympics, like they're called, trying to hammer different things, unless you're Marvin Harrison Jr., who has the right idea. He said, hey, dude, I'm not going to do anything. What is the point? So really the difference between training for the combine and training for football, it looks totally different, right? For starters, you're not wearing pads when you're training for the combine, right? Like once they get drafted by this team, they get into mini rookie camps and stuff like that. They're in shoulder pads and a helmet. It's a lot of start and stop, right? They're in the weight room. They're starting, especially the rookies, like they're starting to lift. And the goal for most, right, unless they're an offensive lineman trying to put on mass or something, a lot of them, the goal is just to get strong, strong as you possibly can. And that looks so much different than training to be explosive and fast, right? So the training is just totally different when it comes to training for the combine versus training for actual NFL football. And that's really the bottom line.
Yeah. And And I think that's what, like I mentioned before, I mean, that could lead to some polls in here and there that as they try and get ready for football season, it's almost like they're cramming for a test at that point. So it's just, and you've talked about it many times. Let the body heal, but also you can't rush the body to get it back into shape. I mean, imagine it. Imagine anybody trying to get back into shape from the couch. Obviously, these guys are way ahead of that, but training for different things, very, very different. Yeah. Plus, I don't want to see a 165 guy trying to bench press 225 pounds too many times trying to train for that, because I don't know if that's good for them. So, Compa, I'm glad you gave that little insight right there. So that's kind of like getting our transition into the running back injuries, the running back landscape. The last 2 episodes we talked about the quarterbacks, and great intel there. And but the running backs, we've talked about this so much. It is a position of car crashes, 10, 15, 20 car crashes that these guys are getting into on a weekly basis. And there's so much attrition there. There is so much of a pounding that this body breaks. Guys don't last in this league. So we're going to break this into 2 episodes. So this episode, we're going to talk about 4 players. We've got another 4 players for the next episode. But I wanted to start with a guy who was one of the league winners in fantasy football last year, Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams was one of the most important players. He was him and Christian McCaffrey were on the most Yahoo championship teams last year. So they were just phenomenal players, but injuries hit him. He missed 5 games with an ankle injury. And also, one thing that a lot of people did kind of glossed over because they got eliminated from the playoffs, he broke a bone in his hand in that one, which would have likely knocked him out if the Rams had won. So we're going to talk about in a future episode about smaller players, and he is under, at least at the combine, he measured under 200 pounds, which is small for a running back. But with first off, let's talk about his kind of recovery from both the injuries, because obviously he looked great after the ankle, but then the hand is on top of it.
Yeah. So the thing about Kyren Williams, and you sort of mentioned it here in the beginning, is that he's got quite the track record for foot and ankle issues. And I don't have it right in front of me, which is because I'm a bad podcaster, but I know that he had the tightrope surgery, right, on that ankle, on one of the ankles before that, he had a foot issue, right? And then he had this other ankle issue again this year. So he's had 3 separate injuries to his feet and ankle. Now, does that make him injury prone? No, not necessarily. But what it does give him is it gives him now a long history of feet and ankle injuries, right? So for a guy who, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Kyren Williams, kind of like a one cut sort of go, like put your foot in the ground and go type of guy. Is that right, compadre?
Yeah, pretty much. And good pass catcher too.
Right, of course, does a good job. So, but for the guys who are really like take a cut and go and they need to quickly plant, foot and ankle injuries obviously can start to take a toll on them. And another guy we're going to talk about here in a little bit on the next episode, I think, is Alvin Kamara, who he's more of a glider, right? So like he can roll his ankle, sprain his ankle, and it doesn't really impact his style as much as a guy who needs to literally stick his foot in the ground and then go. So you do start to worry about, the injury concerns with Kyren Williams, on top of the fact that now he's got massive competition in the backfield, right? And I kind of wonder if the Rams also took, remind me his name, I'm blanking on it. He's still a rookie.
Blake Corum out of Michigan.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I promise I'll learn all these prospects' names. I don't learn them until the middle of the season. I don't prospect enough as I should. But no. So it makes me wonder, like, oh yeah. So we know that if we want a de facto Kyren Williams, he's the closest thing that we can get to it, right? And so I also wonder if they were concerned about his injury history from at least an insurance perspective, because, like you said, he's got this foot and ankle issue. So really, long story short, am I concerned about the foot ankle injury history? A little bit. I'm really more concerned with how much he's going to start splitting that backfield, because like we know, based on a lot of the work that Ryan Heath has done over at Fantasy Points. We know that Dwayne McFarland over at Fantasy Life has also done a lot of work. You can talk about efficiency and yards after contact and targets per game. Those are all matter for running backs, but the number one predictor of fantasy points for any running backs is previous fantasy points and volume, right? So is Kyren Williams going to get the volume, or are they going to cannibalize each other in that backfield for the Rams? So that's the primary concern I see for Kyren Williams. I don't necessarily, as it stands in May, right? I reserve the right to change my mind, but as it stands today, I have a really hard time seeing Kyren Williams being, a top 5 back, simply because I don't think the volume is going to be there.
Yeah, that's tough. Right now he's going off as the running back 7 on underdog drafts, number 20.7 overall. So he's a second round draft pick. He dropped down a little bit after Corum got drafted, but I think it might be something that early on in the season he is seeing like a 65-35 split, but I do kind of see Corum kind of catching up a little bit. Maybe it's the way the Rams keep both of them healthy and effective the whole season, but this someone who was so important to fantasy football at the end of the season, I think is going to be a guy that starts to get faded a little bit as we get into that August, really, really important draft season, because I think it's just, it's tough. It's tough, but yeah, no worries about the, injury recovery though, especially on the hand, because that takes about how long?
No, the injury recovery on the hand. Hand injuries for running backs are not as concerning, right? You obviously don't want a broken bone in your hand, but those things they tend to heal pretty well as long as you give them the proper environment over the offseason. So no, I'm not too concerned with Kyren Williams' hand necessarily.
Okay. Well, we're gonna jump into a new player right now. Going to the other coast, another sunshine place. Raheem Mostert was one of the revelations of fantasy football last year. 18 rushing touchdowns, 21 total touchdowns on the season, doing it at age 31. He was kind of like out of nowhere, compa. He scored more touchdowns last year than he had scored in the rest of his career combined. Just one of the absolute wins, except for the fact that he finished the season sitting out. So he sat out like the most important weeks of the fantasy season, the fantasy playoffs, because he had ankle and knee issues. He's had issues in the past. The last 2 seasons when he's been in Miami, he's missed 3 games total. But before that, the season before that, he played 1 game because he had a leg injury. We're talking about a guy who's going into his age 32 season right now. And now all of a sudden, you talk about injury history so much. How much does his injury history and his age start to give you those La Llorona feelings?
Well, if you're talking about La Llorona, the tequila, I don't think Raheem Mostert often makes me want to drink that much. I don't draft a lot of Raheem Mostert, I'll be honest, but I was maybe you're saying I should have drafted more of him because I did cry big crocodile tears when I didn't have him on my teams. But when it comes to big crocodile tears in terms of his actual injury history, it is a concern. His knee issue, has been well documented, and really Raheem Mostert's just one of those guys that's like, just to me, when I view the situation, I get it. You can miss out on like a big hit. That's like a 1% outcome, right? Like what happened last year was like a 31-year-old running back going off for that much. Maybe we should have seen it coming. I get it, but really just invest in the other guy. Devon Achane, he has been a guy who is going to basically be what you want Raheem Mostert to be. And especially if Raheem Mostert goes down, because he's got that he could at any moment, really, especially at 32, he can get that Todd Gurley syndrome where the knee just locks up, swells up, and never reverses. And we just won't see Raheem Mostert anymore, right? That's the risk. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm saying that risk is very real and very tangible. Just invest in the younger guy, the faster guy, the guy who can win if and when Raheem Mostert goes down, can put up video game type numbers. That's sort of my takeaway with 32-year-old Raheem Mostert.
And one other thing, they also drafted a running back, a high impact running back, Jalen Wright. They drafted him on day 2. So he was one of my favorite running backs going into the draft. Someone who is kind of like, he's bigger than our amigo Achane, as we've called him a few times. He's bigger. He's about the same. He's a little bit bigger than Raheem Mostert. Weighs a little bit more. Ran a little bit over 4.3 on, I think it was 4.33 in the 40. So he fits the suit when it comes to Miami, where they want speed guys. So so that to me is a big concern. There's a part of me that wonders that maybe they run Mostert until the wheels fall off, and then they just bring in Wright, but with Achane still being a major factor. All right, this one, compact. Keaton Mitchell is coming off a major injury. He suffered a torn ACL. Now we don't know if it was more than an ACL, but it happened in week 14. It happened on December 17th, and he had surgery about December 30th right now. And it looked like, I think we talked about it a little bit at the time. It looked like his knee bent backward a little bit, almost a little hyperextended. But yeah, we don't know if more than the ACL has been injured. Having surgery on December 30th, that puts him about a little more than 8 months from surgery date to the start of the NFL season. So he's a dynamic runner, almost 8.5 yards per carry on 47 carries, but he's going into a backfield with Derrick Henry whenever he comes back healthy. But compa, I know you like to talk about 9 months, but I want you to kind of, I want to tee you up on this one, on what the expectation is for when he could be back and healthy.
Yeah, from what we see, what I've read, and everything that we know, it was an isolated ACL, which is great because that's not always the case. So you like to see that. Now, again, it comes back to how ready are they by the time the season hits? If we count back that 9-month mark, which again, if you're a new listener, we use 9 months as a marker because statistically speaking, most surgeons know this, that if an athlete comes back from an ACL tear prior to that 9-month mark, their chances of re-tearing is like 7 times higher than if they wait until beyond 9 months, right? It's not a magic number per se, right? It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's a rule of thumb. So when you look at Keaton Mitchell, his surgery was December 28th, 9 months from them, obviously September 28th. So what they could do with Keaton Mitchell is and interestingly enough, the Ravens are pretty conservative, right? So what you could see happen with Keaton Mitchell is they throw him on the PUP to start the season. He misses the first 4 games. He comes back in week 5. He starts ramping up his workload slowly, and they continue to feed Derrick Henry as many carries as Derrick Henry can handle. And Justice Hill, right, is still there. Is Justice Hill still there? Oh, gosh, yes. I just said that. Okay. Justice Hill's still there, right? I don't think there's any rush to get their second-year running back onto the field, especially if they're a guy he's a guy they want to depend on in the future. So the Ravens tend to play things pretty conservatively. So I wouldn't plan on having a Keaton Mitchell in your lineup. Honestly, again, I hate to use it for everybody, but around the Halloween time is when you can really probably start to see an uptick in Keaton Mitchell, assuming his recovery goes smoothly, is probably when you can start to expect an increase in volume and efficiency for Keaton Mitchell.
And you talk about so much that 9 month and kind of like the markers. One thing, and I forgot to send this to you the other day, I was reading about Joe Burrow, and he talked about how he came back to play by 9 months, but he said he didn't feel like his knee was normal until the year. So, and that's a quarterback. So can you imagine a running back having that? So again, more of what that's more proof of what you've been preaching so much is, 9 months till they play, but 12 months really until that graft is really taken. So Keaton Mitchell, he's going off as the underdog drafts as the running back 58 and pick number 189 right now. So he's really kind of like a dart throw right now. Yeah, he's really like the fourth, fifth. I mean, he's at the very least fifth or maybe even sixth running back if you're driving that deep. He's really just a dart throw at that point. So maybe getting that back half of the season. So that right now is the big recommendation when it comes to drafting him. So we did touch on Alvin Kamara. And you talked about him a little bit. So he closed out the season with an ankle injury. So doesn't look like he had surgery. Everything looks like it's normal. But you know what? It sounds like there's kind of like a little bit of an accumulation of injuries. I remember a couple of years ago, he had an ankle injury that he said that he didn't feel right about it till like March or April the next season. And he's had just an accumulation of injuries that have happened. He's still a great receiving back, caught 75 balls last year, but his run yards per carry was the second lowest of his career, 3.9 yards. Age 29 season. I mean, compa, is this a little bit of something that you start to have a little bit of concerns for a guy who's going off as the running back 17, number 65 overall, which is about like the 6th round in underdog drafts?
You know, that's interesting that his ADP is that low. I'm surprised by that. On the other hand, I'm not as surprised, right? Because he had the fewest carries, just cumulative carries, since 2020. He played 2 fewer games, but that's a big difference, right? That delta is, if we're doing the math right off the top of my head, from an attempts perspective. Oh, I guess not. I guess in 2020, he was just way more efficient, but he had 180 carries in 2023. Like you said, his efficiency is dipping, but like you said, he still gets a lot of that receiving volume that you want. So really from an attempts perspective, you can probably expect his volume to go down, which is not something that you necessarily want to see. Really, you start to play this tricky game, in my opinion, with a running back of like, yes, his carries are going down, but he's still seeing a ton of volume from a targets perspective. Derek Carr just peppered the dude with targets underneath. And can you really continue to count on that in a PPR format? I don't really know, right? Like, what is I really would tell you that for Alvin Kamara, I think if they he's pretty much going to lock it in 2 to 3 games every year. He's one of those guys that just sort of never seems to be 100% right. So from that perspective, you know, that's probably where the ADP dip can come from. But yeah, man, like if he's getting 180 carries, but at the same time, he's getting 80 targets, 90 targets, and it's something that I can live with. But the question is, will that offense still look the same? You know, how much are they going to change from an offensive perspective? Because, you know, his efficiency did dip, right? He's no longer the magician that he was before. That comes with age. That's normal. And, you know, you're going to probably get, 2 to 3 missed games from him every year. But, you know, I know he finished as like a top 5 back in PPR specifically. So I think he's risky. I think he's a guy that I don't necessarily want to invest in going in his 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Year 7, 8. At this point for Alvin Kamara. He's not a guy. I think 6th round maybe is a little too low, but I probably would be willing to take him around the 6th round, to be honest.
I mean, that right now, that's that's the running back dead zone right now. And so many running backs are getting pushed into that point. It may just be that they're playing. He's one of those guys that's a part of a 0 RB build. And, you know, one of the things that you mentioned on a previous episode, Kendre Miller it's Kendre Miller and Jamal Williams, and Kendre Miller coming into year 2 off of a meniscus injury. So, does he become more of a factor at that point? That's going to be a big question that we got to follow. And that's something, and I know we'll talk about Kendre Miller in a future episode on guys coming back from injuries in the 2nd year. So, compa, that was good. That was good. So, quick cultura class right now. And, I was I sent you a text message from mi amigo's backyard party where they had a mariachi in for he and his wife, their son's first communion. And, I think there's very few things that makes someone of sons of Mexican immigrants to really start feeling something more than a good mariachi coming in and playing. So I wanted to ask, do you have a favorite song or two?
I have to go with Tragos Amargos, man. Like that's probably my favorite mariachi song to listen to. It's just got everything in it. How did you not? Come on. You know that was a given. That's like the song I bring up all the time, dude.
They didn't play it.
What's yours? What's your favorite?
You know what? You know, it's funny. It's not a traditional one, but well, Volver, Volver, and El Rey are kind of like the gold standards. I always say that.
Those are awesome. Awesome
Yeah,
choices.
that one you play those, and it's just like everybody sings, everybody drinks, and it's just they're I always say that mariachi is Mexican country music, because you always end up, you're drunk and you lost your girl, and so maybe your horse is broke down, you know, left you, or your horse left you too, or something like that, or your truck's broken. But another one that is very pretty when a mariachi plays it is the song Sabor a Mi, which is so pretty. It's one of my favorite songs in Spanish, but whenever it gets played by a mariachi, it's just just beautiful, But yeah, Mexican country music. You ever familia, amigos, amigas? Yeah, just enjoy it. So, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you're giving us a like and subscribe on YouTube. You know, get that the Injury Prone podcast. Also, you want to make sure, compa, the Pro Athlete PT podcast, it's already out there, out for people to enjoy. Correcto? Love it. Yeah, make sure to check it out. Because you can never get enough of Dr. Edwin Porras. So
that's right. Yeah. Pro Athlete Physical Therapy, the podcast. Go anywhere that you can, anywhere you subscribe to podcasts. And if you want to learn a little bit more about how to stay healthy, how to perform better, and how to be a better athlete, then that's where you want to go.
Love it. So find him at FB Injury Doc on Twitter. You can find me at Jorge Martin 17 on Twitter as well. So you're gonna find my work at RotoWire, Yahoo, Fantasy Pros. So go check it out. But yes, Edwin also mentioned Pro Athlete PT on all the socials. So vámonos, compa. Sending you un trago from California to Colorado. So muchas gracias, and muchas gracias everybody for joining us. Salud.